Folks, thank you for tuning in. It's been a wild weekend. As you know, I don't have to tell you, but I'm going to give you some details, some insights that you're going to find fascinating. I know you've been watching a lot of this already, so I'm going to give you things behind the scenes. So we're covering everything from the assassination attempt of the U.S. president to the Pope in Africa. Just not really getting a lot of coverage, but he's talking about not being too focused. Let's back away from all the focus on sex. So let's get right into it here, folks. One of the things emerging, you've got other details. I'm not going to give you what you already know, but this emerging theme that President Trump is saying and people at the White House that if the ballroom had been already built and constructed, the one that President Trump is trying to build, you'd have a safe place for all these kind of big activities. So a little bit of the theme emerging there. Now, I don't know if you read Barry Weiss, follow Barry Weiss. She, of course, got really large coverage when she was running the Free Press. Barry Weiss, very famous journalist, commentator at most major news outlets, really in the U.S. and even around the world. Up until several years ago, she got booted out of some of them because she was saying that they're all too biased. And then she, as you know, has been hired over at CBS as news editor. So amazing comeback there. Her sister, Susie Weiss, also a formidable journalist in her own right. And Susie has an interesting take on what happened. Susie, of course, was there at the event, and she says what was amazing was to see how she's going to get some flack for this, but how gender roles just automatically clicked in a natural way without anybody thinking. She said generally the men were sort of standing up and ready to, in the ballroom, ready to fight off whoever was going to be emerging with a gun. And women were taking care of people getting under the tables, not out of cowardice, but out of prudence, and even encouraging some of the people who were working, some of the staff there, who were really upset and crying. And let's face it, this is a very fearful set of moments that were taking place in the ballroom there. And Susie Weiss saying this was great, how natural roles kind of fell into place. Interesting take on that. Anyway, Cole Thomas Allen is the dude, and he's in jail. And he's by the time you're listening to this, he's probably coming into the courtroom for his first arraignment. Interesting that this 31-year-old part-time teacher and games guy, some of the take that he has. And former President Obama, again, getting it wrong on just basic news. Obama coming out quite quickly saying some things about this, about the shooter. And they were all proven wrong in the shooter's own manifesto that was published at the same time. So Barack Obama, who is being presented as sort of the face of the Democrat Party, now that it's gotten so extreme, the Democrats are trying to give it a moderate face by they keep getting former President Obama out there in front of the cameras. But very interesting that Obama also got it wrong a couple weeks ago when in Hungary, when Orban lost the election, and Obama said, "Oh, this is great. Now we're going to get back to, common sense, sort of center-left politics." And in fact, the guy who did win was even more conservative than Orban. So just an interesting sidebar that not many people are picking up on. Obama continuing to be the face of the Democrats, but continuing to get his news wrong. Very interesting. And so getting back to this guy, this Cole Thomas Allen, and his so-called manifesto. It's 1,000 words long, which isn't really that long of a manifesto. But he gets everything wrong in his manifesto. He talks about Venezuelan fishermen being blown up by the U.S., when in fact it's the drug boats. He still trots out the old line about Trump and Epstein, which of course has been proven 100% wrong. He trots out a lot of things, but it's grievances. It's grievances against the man, grievances against the system. And already, and you're going to see more of this, he's getting a little bit of sympathy. It's a trend that we saw when, do you remember Luigi Mangione, the guy who shot the shot to death in the back on the streets of New York, the CEO of a big insurance company, and the wave of support that Mangione continues to get as sort of a folk hero. This type of thing is an emerging trend which is not being denounced by the media and is almost giving credence, giving people the right to think it's okay to attack and even kill people if you really think they're doing things that you don't like or you don't agree with. We've seen this trend after Luigi Mangione and his killing. The insurance CEO, another insurance CEO, his home was attacked. That was the guy in Portland. We've seen OpenAI company Sam Altman under an assassination attempt. More and more, you're seeing almost an understanding soft nod from media to people who would want to assassinate those whom they disagree with even on economic issues. So hoping to see that trend go away. We'll be learning more about the shooter. We see that Trump's Susie Wiles, who is Trump's chief of staff, is under some criticism. Some people saying she should be fired because there's been a long-running dispute for the last little while in the White House among who is the present head of the guy who's the head of the Secret Service. And because of some apparent or perceived failings in the past, like the shooting at Butler, where Trump, of course, almost was killed, there's been a strong move among many people to remove the head of the Secret Service. Susie Wiles has been saying, no, keep him. So there's going to be a lot more scrutiny coming out about what actually took place, a lot more following there. We'll follow that with interest, but Trump's chief of staff under some pressure right now. Well, back to news that also is critically mattering. People are focused on what's the latest in Iran And remember last week, we were one of the first ones to talk about right here on the newscast about the split in the Iranian regime, about how there's fighting amongst themselves. And now we see that the Iranian foreign minister, a guy by the name of Abbas Araghchi, if I pronounce it right, going to visit Putin in Russia, and he's supposed to be meeting with him today in St. Petersburg. Remember, Putin has been saying that Iran does have, quote, an inalienable right to develop nuclear weapons. So the split continues there, along with encouragement from Russia that these guys, these crazy Islamist regime extremists, should be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. We'll see if that, in fact, continues and what emerges from that. We already see some movement with Iran saying, okay, we'll agree the Strait of Hormuz should be open, but we're not backing off on our demand and our right to have a nuclear weapon. So seems like they may be a little bit of tension inside, might even be softening to the U.S. position. Remember, it's a battle of chicken, the game of chicken right now. The Iranians thinking that Trump is going to fold and pull out of there because he's worried about the midterms. Trump saying, no, I'm here for the long haul. And the Iranian economy completely cratering because of really the blockade and their oil not being able to go to places like China. So we'll watch as this game of chicken continues there. And in New York City, talking about regimes, Mondani now is coming out. He's defending all of the intensely socialistic economic things that he's bringing in. He's going to be taking over grocery stores, thinking that's going to solve everybody's problem. Every time grocery stores have been, and the food operations have been trying to be run by governments, mainly communists, sometimes socialists, it's always a disaster. Food prices always rocketing up, lineups growing longer. And but Mondani wants to take it all over. And he says now 62% of people living in New York can't afford the basic realities of life. And he was questioned on that, and he said, well, how do you get this 62% can't afford to make ends meet? And the numbers he's using, there are numbers that are used for what's defined as someone below the poverty line, depending on the city, the state, or around the country. That can be anywhere from $35,000 a year, even to $50,000 a year. He says, no, it's $160,000 a year. If you're making $160,000 a year and you have kids, you can't live in New York City. That's why he, as a socialist mayor, has got to take over everything. So kind of interesting to watch that rolling out. In Canada, where there's increasing concern about the deficit and high taxes, we've got Prime Minister Carney just announcing this morning the Canada's first ever sovereign wealth fund, a sovereign wealth fund that eventually, we're waiting for more detail, Canadians will be able to invest in, and it will be one of the items that's used to be able to move along major infrastructure projects. That's coming into early criticism because, once again, not quite as bad maybe as Mamdani in New York City, but government taking over the decision making in terms of where business should fall, what projects should go ahead, not basing it on what the market is demanding, but basing it on what politicians are demanding. So far, that's raising eyebrows and coming up with concerns. Not a whole lot of good history there. We'll see what is $25 billion he's putting into that at the same time that he's running big deficits. So we're going to wait for more news on that. But overall, not really exciting the markets. Brian Peckford used to be, was the former Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. And he's the last living signator of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms when former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau was so-called patriating the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the famous notwithstanding clause, which is really the only protective element a province has against an excessive assault by the federal government in areas of provincial jurisdiction. And Brian Peckford is really blowing the whistle on this. He's saying not only are the federal Liberals trying to take that away from provinces, but he's even worried that the federal Liberals with who they've appointed to the judiciary would see this go to the Supreme Court and take away this last vestige of protection in our Constitution that provinces have in their own areas of jurisdiction. So watch that one. He's raising the alarm. And on the labor side, and another thing that will hurt the economy, of course, the labor movement in Canada, the article's out today, if you want to check over at the National Post and other places, talk about this issue of hot cargo. The union term hot cargo means union workers handling, let's say, shipments, handling packages, handling any goods where they're being made in an area or under an area where there's some kind of a hot dispute going on. And unions in Canada are really promoting now, saying hot cargo should be applied to groups like Labor for Palestine. This is groups in Canada that are saying anything that's made has anything to do with that could be harmful to Palestinians. And of course, this is targeted to products coming out of Israel, should fall under the definition of hot cargo. Now, again, we'll note that unions in Canada never seem to have a problem with products that are coming from China, products that are coming from other jurisdictions which have, like Turkey, which has terrible human rights records, but it's another way of going after Israel, and it's having a real effect on productivity and even on workers being able to have a choice because they're forced by their union contracts to go along with whatever the union head says. So as an example, you have the vice president of CUPE Ontario. This is union workers in Ontario. His name is Mohammed El Qassem, and he's been pushing the LP4, Labor for Palestine, and the hot cargo motion and movement very strongly. This movement within the unions also backs the BDS movement, which is to take all investment away from anything to do with investment or involvement with products out of Israel. They also support the IRGC, these new LP4 movements within the union movement in Canada, supports the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which has been banned. They support other groups that have been banned as terrorists. So not a good look here when you've got this combination of things. You've got the federal government really involving itself more and more on the regulatory side, really involving itself on the investment side, $25 billion sovereign wealth fund, and at the same time, the entire labor movement being dragged down. And we're starting to hear from union workers saying they don't like this, but they're being intimidated. They can't speak up. So not healthy movements that are emerging that would be liberating to the Canadian economy. That goes along with reports out of the Institute of Economic Affairs coming out of the UK, and they're using figures that are coming out of the World Bank and also the London School of Economics, which tend to slide to the left. And they're saying that UK is becoming increasingly uneconomic, increasingly poorer in terms of measuring the GDP, the gross domestic product. And they are now saying that the UK is falling behind even some of the poorer states in the United States, that it's clearly showing that Americans are moving ahead in terms of individual prosperity, even though there's challenges there. And then this report also reflects on Canada, and they say Canada used to be higher up in terms of comparisons with various states, and now our prosperity level, individual GDP and individual prosperity, is compared to the fourth poorest state in the United States, being the state of Alabama. So unless you're reading liberal reading points, or unless you're reading the talking points from the CBC, all indicators are pointing to ongoing slowdown in the Canadian economy because of the overwhelming desire of governments to try and manage every part of the economy. The regulatory regimes in cities, provinces, and at the federal level becoming increasingly suffocating. And folks, if you know people who are running for mayor or councillor in your cities, you really need to insist that there be a legislative committee made up of elected people. We've done this at the provincial level. We did this in a formidable way when I was in cabinet minister in Alberta, when Ralph Klein was was premier, and we brought in a very strong checklist that any new regulation has to face a checklist of questions like who's asking for the new regulation, who could be hurt by it, who is opposing it, what happens if the regulation isn't put into place, and that every new regulation has to be specifically voted on by the elected people in that jurisdiction. Some people say, oh man, that means like city councilors would be bogged down for hours going over every new regulation. Yes, that's exactly the point. Most city councilors have no idea of the effect of the regulatory regime being imposed on cities and on towns and in provinces and states if you're in the US. And at the federal level, there's got to be a much more aggressive look at who's bringing in these regulations and how they are hurting the economy. Well, Gen Z, talking about regulations, really forcing trends in the food industry. Gen Z becoming voracious readers, not necessarily of books, but of those ingredients that are on every label, on every food product. And you can even notice this, and hey, I think it's good to read those ingredients, good to check them out, but I really see it even with my own grandkids and their friends. Man, they are reading the labels carefully, and they really want to see what the protein level is. And protein maxing has really become big for Gen Z, Gen Z. You can now buy, if you didn't know it, folks, you can buy protein popcorn. You can buy protein ice cream with extra protein added. And what a lot of people are doing is simply whatever they're eating, they're adding whey powder to it. So protein up, folks, because that's what the kids are doing. Well, there's a very significant, it seems subtle, but a significant change coming out of the Vatican with the Pope on some very key issues. And this is moving away from the sort of ongoing debate he's been having with President Trump. Because in his visit right now, he's in Africa, and he's made a comment that's largely going under the radar, but he says there's been way too much focus on issues of sexuality, and we've got to be focusing more on issues like fairness and justice, and he's backing away from some of the sexually based issues. Now, a hint here on who likes that approach that he's taking: the LGBT community, and one of their largest nonprofits called Dignity USA has come out praising the Pope for saying, good for you to back away from these debates on items of sexuality. This kind of mirrors way back in 2009 when Pope Benedict went and did his visit to Africa. This is Pope Benedict XVI. He was having a focus on these areas of concern. And now another pope, a new pope, going to Africa, making statements in that country. So there's going to be, the new pope is sort of supporting what Pope Francis did in 2023 when he was making a visit to um, Africa. And remember, Pope Francis got a lot of eyebrows raised by saying that, yes, in certain circumstances, he would bless same-sex marriages, not maybe yet in a formal way, but definitely in an informal way. So Leo is continuing the trend of saying, who am I to judge? And that's going to be interesting to watch. Well, in terms of the way the church is shifting, interesting in Quebec, with the province of Quebec, where of course, everybody's across the country and in the U.S. who loves hockey is watching the playoffs right now, and a beautiful cathedral in Saint Jean de Richelieu in Quebec, and this is the cathedral called Saint Jean l'Evangeliste, Saint John the Evangelist, has been converted to a hockey venue, and it's very interesting to watch in there. They got a huge screen up at the front of the cathedral. It's a beautiful building. And, we talk about church services where people are raising their hands and praising the Lord and singing. Well, they are raising their hands in the cathedral there as they cheer for the Habs. They cheer for the Montreal Canadiens, and lots of cheering going on. And people are saying that's a bit of a metaphor in terms of what's happening with churches and with Christians maybe moving away from worshiping God and worshiping sport and other things. They even offer candles in their services that are in the colors of the Montreal Canadiens. Well, other studies coming out, we'll report on these more specifically, but along with the Gen Z looking at the food labels, which is an important thing to do, studies showing that even more impactful on your health are how you handle emotions, specifically talking about anxiety and resentment, bearing a grudge, that these have strong physiological effects on your body and on what hormones are doing in your body, even more so than some of the protein stuff that's going on. And more studies coming out about how music affects you physiologically. The Bible talks about music being harmonious, music having melody to it, and more music is, even the message and even the formation of the music is far from harmonious and melodious these days, and a lot more pounding going on, which tends to affect the heart physically instead of bringing a peaceful effect on hormones. So we'll watch for the studies there that are emerging. And folks, this has been a wild day in the news. Stay tuned. Keep the comments coming in. We'll talk to you tomorrow.